They had dressed Sabine Harrow in mourning silk that had belonged to her dead aunt, though no one in House Harrow had mourned the woman long enough to crease the sleeves. The bodice had been pinned too tightly, the hem had been let down badly, the shoes were not hers either. They had once belonged to her cousin Celestine, who had worn them only twice before discarding them for a new Paris pair brought across the river in lacquered trunks. The leather had already cracked at the seams. Sabine had stitched the left sole with black thread that morning, but the wet road to Blackless Hall had undone her work. By the time the Harrow carriage rolled beneath the iron gates, one shoe had split again at the toe. Her stocking showed through. "Keep your feet beneath your skirts," Lady Agnes Harrow said without looking at her, "and do not speak unless spoken to. You are present to attend my daughters, not to be seen." Sabine bowed her head. "Yes, Aunt." Lady Agnes's mouth hardened at the word. She preferred Madam, as if blood could be edited by manners. Across from Sabine, Orion and Celestine sat Luminous with jewels and arrogance, each of them perfumed and pale as candle-wax saints. Rubies winked at Orion's throat. Celestine wore pearls in her hair. Both had been prepared for one purpose. Tonight the great houses of the valley would offer their daughters to Lord Alastair Vesper. The last lord of the old vampire blood, the one who had not taken a bride in nearly 2 centuries, the one whose name was spoken softly in winter, as if sound itself might disturb him. Blackless Hall had once been a cathedral. Its nave was now a chamber of treaty and judgment. Candles floated in silver bowls upon black water. Veined marble climbed in dark pillars to a ceiling painted with angels so smoke-dimmed they looked like creatures trying and failing to escape heaven. Noble families lined the central aisle. Silks whispered, gemstones flashed, men smiled too much. Women held their daughters by the wrists as though beauty were livestock that might bolt. At the far end of the hall, above the drowned shine of the floor, sat the night court, 5 vampire elders in carved chairs of obsidian bone. And in the center, still as a carved grief, sat Lord Alastair Vesper. Sabine had seen paintings of him in old books. None had been accurate. Those portraits had made him handsome. The truth was more difficult. Beauty belonged to the living. It asked to be admired. Lord Vesper inspired something colder. He was dressed in black, so severe it seemed to drink the candlelight rather than reflect it. His face was pale, but not weakly so. It had the austere finish of old marble worn smooth by centuries of weather and prayer. His hair was the dark of wet ink. His mouth gave away nothing. His hands rested on the arms of his chair with absolute stillness, the stillness of a man who had never had to fidget for comfort in his life. But it was his eyes that unsettled her. Not red as village stories claimed, not monstrous, silver-gray, ancient enough to make every jeweled woman in the chamber look temporary, a herald stepped forward. By the old covenant between the Night Court and the ruling houses of the valley, daughters of standing may be presented to Lord Vesper. That alliance may be renewed and peace preserved. Sabine knew what that meant. Human estates paid tithe. Vampires kept the mountain roads free of raiders, wolves, and the things that rose starving from the burial marshes each thaw. The old arrangement had held for generations, but rumors had spread this year. Hunters were moving in the north. 2 border chapels had burned. 3 lesser vampire houses had broken from the court. The valley wanted reassurance. The valley always wanted reassurance purchased with someone else's body. One by one, daughters of power were led forward. House Montfleur offered a girl with golden hair and emeralds heavy enough to bruise her collarbones. House Serret presented twin sisters, identical and silent. House Harrow went last, because Lady Agnes liked an entrance. Orion moved first, graceful as a promise she did not intend to keep. Celestine followed, lowering her lashes at exactly the angle she had practiced in mirrors. Sabine stood at the aisle's edge, holding the edge of Orion's train to keep it from dragging through candle oil. Lady Agnes curtsied low. "My lord, House Harrow offers its daughters." Lord Vesper did not move. The silence lengthened. Sabine became aware of absurd things. The ache in her left foot, the tick of cooling wax, the scent of roses beginning to rot in warm air. She kept her gaze lowered. It was not her place to look at him. Then Celestine shifted, and her silver goblet tipped. Dark wine spilled across the black floor, spreading in a ruinous stain. A few drops splashed Sabine's skirt. Lady Agnes hissed in fury. "You wretched child!" But it was to Sabine she turned, because blame obeyed the oldest paths. "Clean it." Sabine knelt at once. The marble was slick. She used the edge of her sleeve, though the silk wickeded the wine uselessly. As she leaned, the split sole of her shoe bent under her. Glass from the fallen goblet, nearly invisible on the dark stone, sliced through leather and stocking into the ball of her foot. Pain flashed white. She made no sound. Years in house, Harrow had taught her how to suffer quietly, but a bead of blood welled bright and perfect and fell. One crimson drop on black marble. The chamber changed. It was not visible at first. It was felt. A tension rippled through the night court. One elder drew in a breath so sharply the sound cut through the hall. Lord Vesper's head lifted. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at someone. Not Orion, not Celestine, Sabine. She went cold beneath the force of that regard. It did not feel like being admired. It felt like being found after a long concealment, or named by something that had waited too long in the dark. The herald faltered. Lady Agnes's smile trembled. Lord Vesper rose. Every person in Blackless Hall seemed to remember, all at once, what he was. He descended the dais without hurry, no rustle of fabric, no flourish. The hall parted around him before he reached it. Sabine was still kneeling, one hand braced on the stained floor, blood warm in her shoe, when he stopped before House Harrow. Lady Agnes recovered first. "My lord," she breathed, nudging Orion forward, "my eldest is renowned for—" "No." His voice was low and unforced. That made it worse. Orion froze. Celestine blinked. The entire hall listened as if the walls themselves had leaned closer. Lord Vesper did not look away from Sabine. "Not that one." Lady Agnes swallowed. "Then perhaps my younger daughter." "No." He extended one pale hand, not to the jeweled women standing upright beneath their mother's ambition, but to the girl kneeling on the floor with wine on her sleeve and blood in her broken shoe. "That one," he said. A whisper tore through the hall. Lady Agnes stared as though she had been slapped. "My lord, that is only my niece." Sabine's pulse thundered so hard she thought she might faint. Lord Vesper's expression did not alter. "I did not ask what she was to you." "She has no dowry," Lady Agnes said. "No land." No gift." Something flickered in the vampire lord's face then, though it was gone before Sabine could name it. Not anger, not amusement, recognition, perhaps. "On the contrary," he said, "she is the only one in this room who arrived carrying what I require." His gaze dropped, briefly, to the blood blooming through the split leather at Sabine's foot. A terrible silence followed. Sabine could feel every eye upon her, could feel Orion's hatred like a knife between the shoulders, Celestine's disbelief, Lady Agnes's sudden panic. She should not have been visible. She had built her whole life upon the safety of not being chosen. Lord Vesper's hand remained extended. His cuff was black velvet. His fingers were bare. He wore no ring. Sabine looked up at him properly then, and what shocked her was not the hunger everyone had warned her of. It was restraint, the terrible, disciplined force of it. As though whatever had risen in him at the sight of her blood had already been mastered, chained, buried beneath centuries of law. "Stand," he said quietly. She ought to have refused, or fled, or asked what bargain was being made over her life. Instead, because no one had ever chosen her for anything before, Sabine placed her trembling hand in his. His skin was cool. The moment their palms met, something moved under her ribs, swift, painful, and old as grief. A memory not hers brushed the edges of her mind. Moonlight on a chapel floor, a woman weeping in white, a man kneeling in blood and swearing obedience while his heart broke soundlessly. Sabine gasped. Lord Vesper's fingers tightened once. Then he turned to the night court and said, before all the valley, "I claim Sabine Harrow." And somewhere high above them, from the cathedral rafters where the smoke had blackened painted saints, came the sound of glass cracking all by itself. Vesper Keep stood where the mountain cut the sky open. Sabine saw it first at dawn, after a sleepless journey through pine forests and ravines full of silver fog. The castle was not picturesque. It did not possess the softened romance of ruined abbeys in old poems. It was stern, cliff-bound, and built to outlive pity. Its towers rose straight from the rock as if the mountain had decided, centuries ago, to grow teeth. The carriage door opened. Cold air rushed in. A line of servants waited in the courtyard, all in dark liveries. No one smiled. No one stared openly either, though she felt curiosity moving through them like current under ice. Lady Agnes had not kissed her goodbye. Orion had refused to look at her. Celestine had whispered, just before the carriage departed Blackless Hall, "He will tire of you once he learns what you are." Sabine still did not know what that was. She was led through halls of black stone and dim candelabra, to a chamber overlooking the eastern precipice. The room was elegant in a severe, old-fashioned way. A canopied bed hung with charcoal velvet, a writing desk inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a fireplace carved with roses and wolves. Fresh gowns had already been laid out. A tray of food waited beside the hearth, the woman attending her bode. She was elderly, square-shouldered, and wore a silver key at her belt. "I am Malin," she said. "I keep the household." Sabine set her travel gloves carefully on the desk. "Am I a prisoner, then, that the keeper of keys has been sent to me first?" The older woman's mouth twitched, not quite smiling. "If you were a prisoner, child, the key would be on the other side of the door." It was not much comfort. Sabine sank onto a chair and tried to ease off her damaged shoe. The stocking beneath was stiff with dried blood. Malin knelt without ceremony and took over the task. "You needn't," Sabine murmured. "Yes, I do." Malin glanced at the wound. "The Lord gave strict instructions. Your foot is to be cleaned and dressed. You are not to walk on bare stone." Sabine stared. "He said that?" "He did." That knowledge unsettled her more than neglect would have. Malin washed the cut with warm water scented faintly of lavender. "You may ask what everyone else is already thinking." Sabine looked toward the window, where morning gathered against the panes like something undecided. "Why did he choose me?" Malin's hands did not pause. "If his lordship wished you to know yet, he would have told you himself." "Will he?" Another strip of linen went around Sabine's foot. "Lord Vesper is not a man who speaks before he must." Sabine almost laughed. "He scarcely seems a man who speaks at all." This time Malin did smile, briefly and with weariness. "You will find, I think, that silence from some people says more than affection from others." That sentence stayed with Sabine through the day. She was shown the keep but not its heart. Corridors curved away into locked wings. A chapel had been made into a library. Portraits of dead Vespers looked down from the walls with the same grave eyes and elegant cruelty of bone. Everywhere there was order. Candles trimmed to equal height, carpets without dust, silver polished to mirror brightness. Even the flowers in their vases seemed arranged to wilt with dignity. But there was no lord. At luncheon, his chair remained empty. At dusk, he did not appear. By nightfall, Sabine began to feel the old humiliation rise, the familiar knowledge of being moved like a chess piece, and then forgotten once she had served her purpose. It should not have hurt. She had been overlooked all her life, yet being chosen before an entire hall and then abandoned in a mountain keep did not feel like neglect. It felt worse. It felt deliberate. When Malin returned that evening, she carried a lacquered box. "For you," she said. Sabine frowned. "From whom?" "You know from whom." Inside lay a pair of boots made of soft black leather, lined in dark fur, sturdy enough for mountain stairs and winter roads, beautiful in their usefulness. Not jeweled, not ornamental, simply made to endure. Beneath them lay a folded card. Sabine opened it. The script was spare and elegant. Stone cuts, wear these, no signature, no explanation. For some reason that nearly undid her. She sat with the note in her hands for a long while after Malin had gone. No one had ever observed her discomfort with such ruthless precision before. In House Harrow, pain had been either invisible or deserved. Here it had been noticed without kindness, remedied without tenderness, and commanded away as if the lord of this impossible castle considered her bleeding an offense to order. That was not gentleness. It was worse. It was attention. Later, unable to sleep, Sabine wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped into the corridor. The keep was quieter by night than any church she had known. She followed the faintest current of colder air down a stair and into a gallery open to the moon. The mountain lay below, vast and black, a world reduced to ridges and silver river lines. And there, at the far end of the gallery, stood Lord Alastair Vesper. He was bareheaded, one hand resting against the stone balustrade. He did not turn when she approached, which made her wonder if he had known she was there all along. Sabine stopped several paces behind him. "My lord, those boots fit." She looked down at them, startled. "Yes, good." The wind moved her hair across her cheek. His own did not stir, or perhaps he was simply too still for lesser things to seem permitted. She had promised herself not to sound wounded. She failed. "Did you bring me here only to avoid speaking to me?" His profile sharpened in the moonlight. "Would you have preferred I speak before I could do so honestly? I would have preferred to know whether I am bride, hostage, shield, or mistake." At that, he turned. No fire burned in his eyes. No monstrous hunger, only a fatigue so old it looked almost aristocratic. "You are none of those," he said. "Then what am I?" His gaze rested on her face, then dropped very briefly to the bandaged foot hidden in the new leather. "A danger." Sabine felt the blood leave her own face. "To whom?" He was silent long enough that fear began to root. Then he said, "That is what I am still determining." Below them, somewhere deep within the keep, a bell began to toll, once, twice, 3 times. Lord Vesper looked toward the sound, and for the first time a crack appeared in the perfect restraint of his expression. Not fear, not quite. Alarm. He took one step toward her. "Go back to your room. Lock the door, do not open it to anyone but Malin." Sabine's throat tightened. "Why?" His answer came like a blade laid flat against skin. "Because the court has sent word," he said, "and they are asking why I forbade them to taste your blood." Sabine did not sleep after that. Morning entered her chamber reluctantly, through cloud and mountain mist, turning the windows pearl gray. Malin arrived with breakfast and news she clearly wished she did not carry. "The night court will not come until tomorrow evening," she said. "His lordship has asked that you remain within the west wing today." "Asked," Sabine repeated. Malin set down the tray. "You may hear it as an order if that eases matters." Sabine almost smiled, but the effort failed. "Will he tell me now what everyone wants from me? I suspect he is deciding how much truth will wound you least." Sabine looked up sharply. "Then it will wound me. All truth does." When Malin had gone, Sabine ate little. She tried to read in the small library adjoining her room and retained none of it. The books in Vesper Keep were old enough to smell of dust and leather and rain. Histories of border wars, prayer books, natural philosophy, poetry copied by hand. One shelf held only law. Old agreements between the valley houses and the night court. Sabine drew out the thickest volume and turned pages until words began to take shape. "By blood solemnly witnessed, protection shall be extended to the valley and its living households. By oath solemnly witnessed, the chosen shall not be taken against her will. By remembrance solemnly witnessed, old grievances shall remain buried unless called forth by the rightful blood." She stopped. Rightful blood. The phrase made something uneasy stir at the edge of recognition. A shadow crossed the page. Sabine looked up. Lord Vesper stood in the doorway. He had entered so quietly that the air seemed merely to have rearranged itself into his shape. Sabine closed the book with more force than grace. "My lord," Sabine, the use of her name unsettled her. He wore the same black as ever, though the cut of it was less ceremonial today, the coat fitted for movement rather than display. He looked as if he had not rested. If vampires needed rest at all, she did not know. His face was unchanged, yet something in him seemed pulled tighter, as a bowstring is tightened not by anger but by necessity. "You were reading law," he said. "I had little else to read that seemed likely to explain why your court wishes to drink me." A faint, bleak amusement touched his mouth and vanished. Directness suits you. It is a luxury of fear. He crossed the room and stopped beside the table, but did not sit. Your aunt never told you who your mother was. Sabine's pulse stumbled. My mother was Elinor Harrow. No, his tone remained quiet. She was Elinor Vale Remise. House Harrow buried her name when she married beneath her station, and again when she died. Sabine stood so quickly her chair scraped. That is impossible. Is it? He watched her with maddening steadiness. Did no one ever find it strange that an orphan niece without dowry was still kept under the family roof, not loved? Not cherished, merely retained. Sabine thought of locked drawers, of conversations cut short, of letters burned unread after Lady Agnes had taken them from the hall table. Of being told, all her life, that gratitude ought to replace questions. She died when I was 12, Sabine said. I remember her little enough as it is. Do not invent her to control me. At that, something sharpened in his face. I do not invent, he said. That is what your blood does. The room seemed to tilt. Sabine gripped the back of her chair. My blood. He reached, very slowly, into his coat and withdrew a slim object wrapped in black cloth. He laid it on the table and unfolded the fabric. Inside was an old silver locket, tarnished dark at the hinges. Sabine stared, her breath caught. My mother S, you know it. I thought it lost. It was in the court archives. He touched the metal lightly, as if it were evidence in a trial. It was taken the night she died. Sabine's fingers trembled before she forced them still. Open it. He did. Inside were 2 miniatures, worn with age. On one side, a woman Sabine remembered only in fragments. Dark hair, grave eyes, the same narrow hands Sabine saw in her own reflection. On the other side was a symbol inked in faded red, a rose enclosed in a circle of thorns. I've seen that mark, Sabine whispered. Yes. Where? In the oldest covenant seals, on certain graves. And once, his gaze held hers now with terrible precision, on the stone where your blood fell in Blackless Hall. A pulse of memory brushed her again, stronger this time. White stone, moonlight. Red staining mortar lines. A woman saying, remember for me. Sabine staggered back 1 step. Lord Vesper moved instantly, then stopped himself before touching her. What are you? She asked, hating the thinness in her own voice. His answer came after a beat. The wrong person to ask first. She laughed once, sharply, on the edge of tears. You brought me to your mountain, called me danger, told me my mother's name was buried, and now you refuse me answers. I refuse you half-truths. Something in him darkened, not menace. But the effort of restraint. There are humans born, rarely, to lines the court has spent centuries diminishing. They carry memory in blood, not prophecy, not magic in the crude sense, memory. Truth that survives burial. Sabine thought of Lady Agnes insisting certain old family chapels remained locked, of documents disappearing, of her mother avoiding church mirrors. Of the way, as a child, Sabine had touched certain old objects and felt grief she did not understand. She knew, Sabine said faintly. My mother knew, yes, and House Harrow kept me hidden. Yes, why did you choose me? This time he answered at once. Because the moment your blood touched the covenant stone, every elder in Blackless Hall understood what you were. Had I not claimed you, they would have claimed you instead. Sabine stared at him, cold with comprehension. Then I am not your bride. At last, a crack. Not in his control, precisely, but somewhere beneath it, a wound made visible by one sentence. You are under my protection, he said. That is not what I asked. Silence opened between them, vast as the ravine below the keep. Then very softly he said, no, it is not. The bell below began ringing again. Malin appeared in the doorway, pale. My lord, he turned. There is blood on the lower stair, she said, not hers. Someone is already inside the keep. Lord Vesper's expression changed so little that another person might not have seen it. Sabine did. He had become dangerous. He looked back at her once. Lock this room behind me. But before he could leave, a scream rose from somewhere below, and with it came a voice Sabine knew too well. Lady Agnes Harrow had arrived. House Harrow entered Vesper Keep. as if insult entitled them to hospitality. Lady Agnes swept through the lower hall in widow-black and diamonds, flanked by Orion, Celestine, and 3 armed retainers who looked deeply unhappy to be under a vampire roof. Sabine came down the great stair before anyone could forbid her, one hand on the banister, Malin close behind with quiet disapproval. The hall was built for scale. Even so, Lady Agnes managed to fill it with offense. "This arrangement is an outrage," she declared to the vaulted ceiling. "My niece has been confused for blood she does not possess, and station she has never held. House Harrow will not be mocked." From the foot of the stair, Lord Vesper regarded her with the same expression one might give a spoiled child setting fire to a prayer book for attention. "You entered my keep armed," he said. Lady Agnes lifted her chin. "I entered to retrieve my kin." "Your kin?" His gaze flicked briefly to Sabine, then back. "How novel." Orion's eyes found Sabine. Hatred burned there without embarrassment. Celestine looked frightened instead, as if the mountain itself might bite. Lady Agnes spread gloved hands. "The girl has always been fragile, impressionable. She mistakes simple household stories for truth. If some old trinket or legal fiction has led your lordship astray..." "Enough!" It was the first time Sabine had heard steel under his voice. The retainers visibly recoiled. Lady Agnes stiffened. "You forget, my lord, the valley houses do not exist solely to supply your court. And you forget," he said, "that I have not fed on diplomacy in 400 years. The hall went silent. Sabine should have been afraid of him then. Instead, she watched her aunt's composure fray and felt, to her own shame, a low, fierce satisfaction. Lady Agnes turned on her. "Sabine. Come here." Years of obedience rose like muscle memory. Sabine took one step down and stopped. Lord Vesper did not touch her. He did not speak. But she felt the weight of his stillness beside her like an offered wall. Lady Agnes's eyes narrowed. "After all I have done for you..." The old guilt reached for Sabine, dressed in the voice she had heard since childhood. "Fed you, sheltered you, kept you." Sabine heard herself answer with a calm she did not feel. "You kept me because I belonged to something you wished buried." For the first time, Lady Agnes looked genuinely afraid, not of Lord Vesper. Of Sabine. That realization had scarcely struck when one of the armed retainers gave a strangled cry. He clawed at his throat, staggering backward. A thin silver quarrel protruded from the side of his neck. The window above the entry shattered inward. Chaos split the hall. A second bolt struck a pillar. A third grazed Orion's shoulder and sent her screaming. Men in ash-colored coats poured through the broken window and the service arch beyond it, faces veiled, weapons gleaming with blessed silver. Hunters, Sabine had heard of them in whispers only. Men who believed all vampire blood was an offense before God and all treaties a corruption of human law. She had never imagined Lady Agnes arrogant enough or desperate enough to bring them to Vesper Keep. Lord Vesper moved. It happened so fast Sabine could not fully see it. One instant, he stood at the center of the hall in black stillness. The next, one hunter was against the far wall with his spine broken, another was disarmed, a third had lost his throat before his blade reached striking height. There was no frenzy in it. No loss of control. It was efficiency so absolute it became horror. Malin dragged Celestine behind a column. Orion sobbed over her bleeding shoulder. Lady Agnes backed toward the stair, white-faced. A hunter seized Sabine from behind. The knife at her throat burned cold. "Move," he hissed, "or he dies with her." Lord Vesper stopped. The hall held its breath. Sabine could feel the hunter's pulse hammering through the arm locked around her. Lord Vesper's gaze rested on the blade, then on her face. Nothing in him shifted. Yet she understood, in some instinct deeper than logic, that he was balancing 10 possible deaths against one. The hunter dragged her backward toward the broken window. "She comes with us. Do you know what she is?" Lord Vesper asked. The man's laugh shook. "A bargaining tool." "No," Alistair said. "That mistake will cost you." The hunter pressed the knife harder. Sabine felt the edge bite skin. Not deep. Enough. One hot line of blood slid down her throat. The world lurched. The hall vanished. She was elsewhere, inside brightness, cold and moonlit. A chapel long ago. A woman in white standing before an altar, face wet with tears. Men in velvet and gold masks encircling her. On the floor knelt a younger Alastair Vesper, his hair loose, his mouth blood-marked, his expression not yet trained into stone. He was saying over and over, "Forgive me." "Forgive me." The woman turned. She had Sabine's eyes, then the vision broke. Sabine gasped aloud. The hunter's grip faltered in shock. Lord Vesper was suddenly there, wrenching the man away so violently bone cracked like kindling. Sabine stumbled, struck the base of the stair, and would have fallen if he had not caught her. His hands closed around her arms. The contact tore the memory wider. She felt his shock answer hers, felt centuries of restraint strain to breaking. Felt guilt, hunger, and an old vow bleeding into the present. He stared down at her throat, where her blood had welled bright against skin. The entire world seemed to narrow to that one point of crimson. Sabine saw it happen, the war inside him, hunger rising like a storm tide, will locking over it, hunger again, will again. His grip tightened once, not bruising, but desperate. Then he hauled her behind him and turned on the remaining hunters with such terrible quiet that even the dying stopped crying out. The fight ended quickly after that. When silence returned, it came raggedly. Broken glass littered the floor. One retainer groaned. Orion whimpered from behind a pillar. Lady Agnes had collapsed into a chair as if her bones had deserted her. Lord Vesper still stood between Sabine and the ruined hall. At last he said, without looking back, "Take House Harrow to the south rooms, disarm them, lock every door." Lady Agnes found her voice. "You cannot imprison me." He turned then, and whatever Lady Agnes saw in his face silenced her more effectively than any shout. Malin began issuing orders. Sabine's knees weakened. Lord Vesper looked down at the blood drying at her throat. Very carefully, with the restraint of a man handling a relic or a weapon, he raised one hand. His thumb stopped just short of touching the wound. "Did you see it?" he asked, barely audible. Sabine swallowed. "A chapel, a woman, you on your knees." Something agonized passed through his eyes. "Yes," he said. "Who was she?" His answer came like a confession dragged through glass. "The last woman your blood remembers." And then, before Sabine could ask another question, he stepped away from her as if remaining any closer might damn them both. Lady Agnes and her daughters were confined to the south wing under guard. The hunters, dead, were burned before sundown. No priest was invited. Sabine spent the afternoon in a room above the abandoned chapel library, wrapped in a wool shawl though the fire blazed high. Her throat had been bandaged. Her hands would not stop shaking. Malin brought tea. Sabine did not touch it. "The woman in the vision," she said. "Who was she?" Malin closed the door before answering. "Her name was Elira Ramiz." Sabine tasted the name silently. "She was of your mother's line," Malin continued. "A rememberer, one of the last openly acknowledged. The court used such women once to witness oaths, settle old claims, and keep certain truths from being erased by power." "Used," Sabine repeated. Malin's face tightened. "Yes," Sabine looked down at her own hands, "and Lord Vesper knelt before her. He loved her." The simplicity of that truth hurt in a place Sabine had not prepared to defend. She turned toward the fire. "What happened?" Malin was quiet for so long Sabine thought she might refuse. "At the time," she said at last, "the valley was tearing itself apart. Famine, border war. Human lords turning on one another. The Night Court offered protection, but the elders wanted stronger terms. They demanded a witnessing bride from the Ramiz bloodline to bind new law." Sabine's throat dried. "Elira, yes. And Lord Vesper? He opposed the bargain, not because he lacked duty. Because he understood what the court called duty when a woman was the price." Malin folded her hands, but he was not yet head of the court. Others outranked him. Sabine saw again that younger man in the vision, kneeling in bloodlight with anguish unhidden on his face. "What did they do to her?" "They married her to the covenant in public," Malin said. "Then kept her under watch until the child she carried died within her, and the court decided the line was weak." Sabine's breath caught painfully. They killed her. They called it fever. The room fell silent except for the fire. Sabine understood, suddenly, why Lord Vesper's restraint felt less like coldness than penance. My mother knew, she whispered. That's why she hid, that's why House Harrow erased her. Malin nodded. Elinor fled with what records she could steal from the court. She married a scholar. She hoped obscurity would succeed where law had failed. My father, a decent man from all I heard, he died before they found her. After her death, House Harrow took you in, not from mercy, but because they knew what you might become if anyone else recognized the blood. Sabine thought of her aunt's careful humiliations, then with new clarity. Never pretty enough to draw offers, never educated enough to ask legal questions, never cherished enough to develop will in public. An unseen girl was easier to keep. But my blood did not reveal itself before, she said. Not until Blackless Hall, not until the Covenant Stone tasted it. Sabine stood and crossed to the narrow window. Snow had begun falling over the pines, soft and treacherous. So the court wants me because I can remember what was buried, and because what is buried may unmake men who sit very high. Sabine pressed her fingers to the cold, leaded glass. And Lord Vesper, Malin's voice gentled, he wants you alive. That is not the same. No, Malin said, it is not. When Malin left, Sabine remained by the window until dusk thickened. Then she did the one thing House Harrow had never expected her to learn. She searched. The chapel library yielded little at first beyond law books and sermons. But behind the carved altar, half concealed by warped paneling, she found a narrow stair dropping into the keep's older foundations. It smelled of damp stone and candle grease. At the bottom waited a crypt used for records rather than bones. Chests lined the walls. Iron shelves held ledgers roped in black. On the innermost shelf, beneath a layer of dust, Sabine found a cedar box marked with the thorned rose from her mother's locket. Inside lay letters. Most were too damaged to read. One remained intact enough. The hand was elegant but hurried. If they come for the child, do not send her to the court. House Harrow will bury a daughter if it means preserving a name. Let them. Better cruelty than ceremony. Better obscurity than witness. If she inherits what I fear, the blood will wake only where old vows were broken. Pray she is never taken near the Covenant Stone. Elinor Vale Remise. Sabine sank onto the cold floor. Her mother had known, had traded her daughter's happy life for a hidden one because the alternative was worse. The knowledge should have felt like love. It did. It also felt like inheritance in its harshest form, a woman protecting another woman with the only bad choices left to her. A sound came from above. Not footsteps, too soft. Sabine rose, folding the letter into her bodice. A shadow detached itself from the crypt doorway. Lady Morcant of the Night Court entered as if she had been invited. She was beautiful in the merciless way winter lakes are beautiful, smooth, bright, and concealing depth that kills. Her hair was white blonde, her gown the color of midnight oil. So, the elder said, her gaze dropping to the open box, the little buried thing has begun to remember. Sabine's heart thudded once, hard. Lady Morcant smiled without warmth. And now, she said, we must decide whether you will serve the law that made you, or die before you can read what it truly says. Lady Morcant did not advance. She did not need to. The crypt was small enough that her calm alone felt like invasion. Sabine forced her spine straight. You entered without leave. I helped write the customs by which this keep was first governed, Morcant said. There are few doors here denied to me. Her eyes flicked to the letter hidden against Sabine's ribs, and Sabine knew, with a sinking clarity. That concealment was nearly useless, in the presence of creatures who had practiced power longer than nations had existed. You frightened Blackless Hall, Morcant went on. That was unkind of you. Sabine almost laughed. I bled in the wrong place. Is that a crime now? It has always been a crime to reveal truths men prefer arranged. Morcant glanced at the thorned rose on the cedar box. Your line has a vulgar habit of doing that. Sabine held the elder's gaze, because lowering it felt too much like kneeling. If you wished me dead, you would not have come alone. A glimmer of approval crossed Morkant's face. "No, death is blunt. We require something finer." "What?" "A reading." Morkant folded her hands. The old covenant was sealed in stages over years by many hands. Some clauses were witnessed in blood no living scribe now recalls. "Your blood may." "May," Sabine echoed. "Or may not." "Oh, it will." Morkant's smile thinned. "Pain improves memory." The air seemed to contract. Before Sabine could answer, a voice came from the stair above. "Leave her." Lord Vesper descended one step at a time, and though the crypt was unchanged physically, every stone in it seemed to choose a side. Lady Morkant turned. "You grow discourteous, Alastair. She is under my protection. She is under the law, and I remember which came first." For one instant Sabine saw it, the history between them. Older than her language for it. Morkant, who wielded rules like scalpels. Alastair, who had once obeyed them and had not forgiven himself since. Morkant regarded him coolly. "Your sentiment is becoming expensive. If you touch her," he said, "it will become fatal." No one moved. At last Morkant inclined her head with terrible grace. "Tomorrow at moonrise. Bring her to the court chamber, voluntarily if possible." Her gaze slid back to Sabine. "If not, blood remembers under duress as well." Then she was gone, her steps soundless on the stair. Sabine's knees weakened only after the elder vanished. Lord Vesper stood motionless until the last trace of Morkant's presence had thinned from the air. Then he looked at Sabine, at the open cedar box, at the fear she had not hidden quickly enough. "You should not have been here alone," he said. Anger rose so swiftly it almost steadied her. "No. Would you have preferred I remain in my room, docile and ignorant, until your court opened my veins?" His expression tightened. "I would have preferred to tell you before she did, but you did not." Sabine stepped toward him, letter crackling against her ribs. "Every answer in this keep arrives one breath too late." For a moment, she thought he would retreat into silence again. Instead, he closed the distance by one measured pace. "I chose you to prevent exactly this, and yet this is happening." "Yes," the word landed heavily. Sabine swallowed. "Did you love Elira Ramiz?" His face became stiller, not less alive but more dangerous in what it concealed. "Yes." There was no softening it, no excuse. "Did you let them kill her?" He shut his eyes once. "When the covenant was rewritten," he said, "I believed obedience would prevent a greater slaughter. I believed I could preserve her by preserving order around her. Men tell themselves such things when cowardice wears the robes of duty." He opened his eyes. "I was wrong." The honesty of it cut deeper than denial would have. Sabine drew a breath that shook. "So now you protect me to repay a dead woman." Something flashed across his face then, pain but sharper. "No," he said. "I protect you because I know what this court does to women whose blood embarrasses it." The crypt held that truth between them like a third presence. Then softly he added, "And because you are not her." That should not have mattered. Yet the fact that he said it at all made something fragile loosen in Sabine's chest. He extended his hand. "Come upstairs." She hesitated. Then she placed her fingers in his palm. The contact was brief. It should have been nothing. Instead, the world shifted. A brief vampire POV, her hand was warm. He had known warmth as warfare, as temptation, as remembered punishment. He had known how to kill men, and how to govern valleys, and how to sit motionless through centuries of petition, without revealing boredom or grief. He had not known what to do with a mortal girl whose pulse trembled under her skin like a trapped bird, and who still, even now, looked at him as if truth mattered more than fear. Sabine Harrow was not beautiful in the way courts prized beauty. That was one of the first mercies he had noticed about her. No vanity had trained her into performance. Her face showed every effort of endurance. Her mouth had learned silence, but not falseness. Her kindness survived humiliation, and that was rarer than bloodlines. When her blood touched the covenant stone, memory had struck him like a blade to an old wound. Not because she resembled Elira, because she carried the same right to testify against power. And because when the hall stared, dazzled daughters froze, noble mothers calculated, and Sabine, bleeding through a torn shoe, had still knelt to clean another woman's mess. A creature like him had no business wanting such a person to look at him without fear, yet he wanted it, and that, perhaps, was the most dangerous truth in the keep. Back to Sabine by the time they reached the upper corridor, Sabine could not tell whether the dizziness under her skin came from fear, old memory, or the quiet force of his hand leaving hers too soon. At her chamber door, he stopped. "Tomorrow," he said, "the court will demand a reading. I know. If you refuse, they may try force. If I comply," his gaze lowered, not to her mouth or throat, but to the pulse fluttering at the base of her neck, as if he despised himself for noticing. "Then we learn which truths they fear most." Sabine pressed one hand to the door latch. "And if those truths condemn you too," a strange expression crossed his face then, not dread. Something almost like relief. "Then," he said, "at last I will have deserved it." He turned to go. But as he reached the corridor's shadowed bend, a servant came running white-faced from the south wing. "My lord, Lady Agnes is gone," Lord Vesper stilled. The servant's next words fell like stone. "And she has taken Miss Orion to the Old Road Chapel." The Old Road Chapel stood above a gorge where travelers once prayed before winter crossings. By the time they reached it, the moon had risen red through thin cloud, staining the snowfields and the ruined bell tower alike. Sabine rode before Lord Vesper on a black horse that felt scarcely mortal beneath them. He had wrapped his cloak around her against the cold without comment. She had not argued. The wind at that height cut too hard for pride. The chapel doors stood open. Candlelight trembled within. Sabine knew the place before she crossed its threshold. Not from memory exactly, but from blood, a shiver of recognition under the skin. This was the chapel she had seen in fragments, the one where vows had once been spoken and broken. Inside, the nave was small, half-collapsed, its saints weathered faceless by damp and time. The old altar remained. Before it stood Lady Agnes, rigid with triumph sharpened by desperation. Orion knelt at the base of the altar, wrists bound with silver chain, her face white with fury and tears. On either side of the chapel waited armed hunters in ash-gray coats. And behind the altar, elegant as a blade kept bright through generations, stood Lady Morkant. "So prompt," Morkant said. "I had wondered whether sentiment would slow you." Lord Vesper dismounted first and lifted Sabine down with severe restraint, his hands at her waist only as long as necessity required. Then he stepped slightly before her, not enough to command, enough to shield. "Release the girl," he said. Lady Agnes gave a brittle laugh. "You refused my daughters before the whole valley. Tonight one of them will at least prove useful." Orion twisted toward her mother in disbelief. "Mother, silence." Sabine felt the old recoil of childhood, that instinctive shrinking before cruelty wearing family's face. Then Orion's eyes found hers, and what she saw there was not merely hatred now. It was terror. Orion had never been invisible, she had never imagined what helplessness cost. Morkant lifted one pale hand. "We are not here for melodrama. We are here because the court requires certainty. The rememberer will approach the altar." Sabine's pulse quickened. "And if I do not?" The elder's gaze touched Orion's chained wrists. "Then House Harrow loses a daughter after all." Lady Agnes did not flinch. Sabine looked at her aunt in disbelief. "You brought hunters into his keep. You offered your own child as bait." Lady Agnes's expression cracked into something raw and ugly. "I kept this family from ruin while softer women died of principle. I kept our lands. I kept our name. Do you think power survives on innocence?" Her eyes glittered. "You should be thanking me. If your mother had possessed half my sense, she would have bent instead of hiding." "My mother chose love over fear," Sabine said. "Your mother chose obscurity. And you chose this," Lord Vesper said softly. The hunter nearest Orion lifted his crossbow. "Enough talk." Sabine stepped forward before Alistair could stop her. She felt rather than saw his tension sharpen. "I will go to the altar," she said. "But no one touches her," Morkant smiled. "At last, the blood behaves as expected." Sabine moved up the center aisle alone. Every candle seemed to lean toward her. The altar stone was cracked through the middle, darkened by centuries of smoke and kneeling hands. The thorned rose was carved at its base. When she reached it, the air changed. Memory rose swift and merciless. A woman in white, winter lilies crushed under boot heels, rings of witnesses, a priest too frightened to meet her eyes. Young Alastair kneeling, blood on his mouth, bound by law stronger than mercy. Not a wedding. A sentencing disguised as one. Sabine gripped the altar to stay upright. Morkant's voice came from behind her. Blood on stone. No, Alastair said. The refusal struck the chapel like a thrown knife. Silver flashed as the hunters raised weapons toward him. He did not move. The red moon painted one side of his face like a wound. Morkant's tone cooled. You presume much for one Lord Alastair. I presume nothing, he said. I remember. So do I. Enough to know the law outranks your regret. Sabine closed her eyes. The blood memory pulsed harder, as if her own fear were feeding it. She could feel the old wrong in the stone itself, layered and hidden, waiting for witness. Slowly she drew the pin from her hair. The metal trembled between her fingers. No, Alastair said again, lower now. She looked back at him. His control was intact, but only barely. She saw it in the set of his mouth, the stillness that had become too absolute. Not fear for himself, fear for her, fear of what the truth might ask. If I do nothing, she said, they will never stop. His eyes met hers across candlelight and ruined years. Something like anguish passed through them, and with it reluctant consent, not to the court but to her will. Sabine pressed the hairpin into her palm, a bright sting, a line of red. She laid her bleeding hand against the altar, the chapel convulsed with memory, sound vanished, light fractured. Sabine stood within the past again, but clearer now, as if the blood had opened a door fully at last. Elira Remise knelt before the altar, not weeping now but furious, hands bound in silver ribbon. The elders surrounded her. A younger Morkant held a written covenant, and Alastair, beautiful, unbroken yet already grieving, was forced to kneel opposite. A clause was spoken aloud. No daughter of witness shall be compelled to covenant by threat against her blood or household. Any vow taken under such coercion is void before knight and god alike. The words rang through the chapel. Then another memory, faster, buried beneath the first, Morkant ordering that clause struck from later copies. Agnes's father receiving payment to suppress Remise records. Elinor stealing letters in the dark. Sabine gasped and the vision burst outward into the living chapel. Everyone heard it. Not with ears, perhaps, but with whatever faculty humans and monsters alike used when truth arrived too directly to deny. Morkant went still. Lady Agnes stumbled backward. Orion began to sob. The covenant was falsified, Sabine said, her voice shaking but audible in every corner. The court condemned Elira under a law it had already broken. One hunter made the sign against evil. Morkant recovered first. Memory is not proof. It is here, Sabine whispered, touching the stone. In the altar, in the blood, in him. All eyes turned to Alastair. He did not defend himself. That more than anything damned the court. Morkant's beauty hardened. Then we proceed without law. The hunters moved at once. Alastair was among them before breath could complete itself. Sabine saw Silver bite his shoulder and fail to slow him. One man fell screaming. Another went over a pew with his throat opened. Snow blew through shattered side windows. Orion cried out as her chains snapped under a stray bolt. Sabine ran to her. "Can you stand?" Orion stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why are you helping me?" Sabine almost answered because no one helped me. Instead she dragged her up. "Move!" A hunter lunged. Sabine seized the fallen altar candle and drove the iron spike of its stand into his wrist. He shouted, dropping the blade. Orion kicked him hard enough to send him sprawling. Across the chapel, Lady Agnes tried to flee through the sacristy door. Morkant caught her by the arm. "You promised compliance," Lady Agnes choked. "I brought her," and failed. With terrible elegance, Morkant shoved her between herself and a charging hunter's bolt. The quarrel struck Lady Agnes clean through the chest. She fell without grace, diamonds scattering over old stone. Orion screamed. Sabine froze. In that single beat, Morkant reached the altar and seized Sabine's bleeding hand. The elder's fingers were ice. "Then I will read you myself," she said. But before Sabine could wrench free, Alistair's hand closed around Morkant's throat. The entire chapel seemed to darken. For the first time, the elder looked afraid. "Touch her again," he said, "and I will make the court elect another historian." Morkant's lips curved through pain. "You would kill an elder for a mortal witness." His answer came colder than the mountain wind. "For her, I would burn the law that made me." And in the shocked silence that followed, Sabine understood the danger had changed its name. They returned to Vesper Keep before dawn with one dead matriarch, one shaken daughter, and a truth that could no longer be politely buried. Lady Agnes's body was laid in the lower chapel. Orion refused to leave it. Celestine, when told, did not cry at first. She only sat down on the corridor floor as if her bones had become incompatible with standing. Sabine watched the sisters from a distance and felt no triumph, only a bleak exhaustion. Cruelty had ruled their house, but cruelty was still a structure people learned to live inside until it collapsed on them. Lord Vesper vanished into the East Tower to answer urgent summons from the court. Sabine was taken to her chamber, where Malin cleaned the cut in her palm and the scrape at her throat with a face set in grim lines. "You should have let none of this touch you," the older woman muttered. "They would have touched others instead." Malin tied the last bandage. "That is why decent girls are so dangerous." When she left, Sabine stood alone at the window and watched dawn break over the ravine in a slow gray wound. The keep looked unchanged from outside. Within it, everything had moved. By afternoon, whispers ran through every hall. Morkant had returned to the court. 2 elders refused to speak. Hunters were massing in the lower pass, emboldened by rumors of division among vampire houses. The old law, once sacred because no one living could testify against it, had become unstable. At sunset, there came a knock at Sabine's door. She knew it was him before he spoke. "May I enter?" The formality nearly undid her. "Yes." Lord Vesper stepped inside. Snowmelt darkened the hem of his coat. The silver wound at his shoulder had bled through one seam, though he seemed not to notice. He closed the door behind him and remained there for a moment, as if testing whether proximity alone would break something he had spent centuries preserving. "The court convenes at midnight," he said. "Morkant will demand custody. Others will argue for destruction of all Remy's records. The valley houses will turn whichever way promises them least danger." Sabine watched the dark stain at his shoulder. "You are injured. It is nothing. That is a lie." A faint change crossed his face, almost a shadow of irony. "I am told I speak poorly when not lying." She took one step toward him. "Sit down. Sabine, sit." Perhaps because she had never commanded anyone in her life, the word emerged more plea than authority. Yet he obeyed. He sat in the chair beside the hearth. She fetched the basin and clean cloth from the dressing table. Her hands trembled only once, when she opened his coat and saw the wound properly. Silver had torn a line just beneath the collarbone, raw and dark at the edges. "This is nothing," she said. "It would be, had I been less distracted." The answer fell between them too gently to be dismissed. Sabine soaked the cloth in warm water and cleaned the blood in careful silence. He did not flinch, but the stillness in him changed. It was no longer the impersonal restraint of a lord receiving service. It was vigilance, not against her, against himself. "You told Morkant you would burn the law for me," she said quietly. He looked at the fire. "I did. Why?" At that, he lifted his eyes to hers. Because the answer mattered, Sabine could tell. Because once spoken, it would alter the room irrevocably. "Because I have spent too long kneeling to systems that called themselves necessity," he said. "Because when they threatened you, every argument I once used to excuse obedience became intolerable." A pause. "Because there is a difference between duty and surrender, and I learned it too late once already." Sabine wrapped the clean bandage around his shoulder. Her fingers brushed his skin. Cool, hard. "Too aware. And me?" she asked before caution could stop her. "What difference am I to you?" The air in the chamber drew tight. He could have evaded, he did not. You are the first person in 200 years, he said, before whom I have wished to deserve mercy. Her breath caught. He reached up then, very slowly, and took hold of her wrist, not to stop her, not to pull her closer, only to steady the hand that had begun to shake. The contact burned through her. All her life, desire had been something contained, unnamed, folded inward like secret linen. Now it rose with terrible clarity, not bold and not shameless, but deep enough to frighten. She did not move toward him. She did not know how. Yet neither could she summon the old instinct to flee. His gaze dropped to her mouth and then away again, as if even that were a trespass. "Do not ask me gentler questions tonight," he said, voice low. "I am near the limit of what restraint can look like." Sabine's pulse fluttered violently. Instead of retreating, she said the truest thing she had. "I am tired of truths arriving after danger." Something in him gave way then, not control but distance. He rose. For one suspended moment they stood close enough for his breath, though unnecessary, to brush her temple. One of his hands came up and stopped beside her face, not touching, asking without asking. Leaving room for refusal so complete it was almost painful. Sabine did not step back. That was all the permission he took. His fingers settled against her cheek with reverence so restrained it became unbearable. He bent his head. His mouth touched hers once, gentle, brief, almost solemn, not hunger, not conquest. A vow spoken in the language both of them had been denied. When he drew back, Sabine realized her eyes had closed. Embarrassment flooded her, then something stranger and softer. She opened them to find him looking at her, as if the kiss had cost him more than blood. "I should not have done that," he said. "No," she whispered, though her hand had risen of its own accord to the front of his coat, lightly gripping the fabric. "But I am glad you did." His expression changed, wonder, pain, and a hunger so disciplined it made her trust him more, not less. Then he lifted her bandaged palm between both of his hands. "There is one thing," he said. "The court may try to force another reading tonight. If they do, memory may overwhelm you." He hesitated, and for the first time she heard uncertainty in him. A voluntary exchange of blood can anchor witness. It is old, sacred. Not undertaken lightly. Sabine knew what he was asking even before his gaze shifted, almost unwillingly, to the pulse in her wrist. "Will it bind me to the court?" she asked. "No, to you." His silence was answer enough. Fear moved through her, not of him but of permanence, of being altered by a choice no one else had made for her. Yet beneath that fear lay something steadier. Trust, fragile as first light. She tipped her chin up. "If they come for me tonight, I would rather be bound to what is chosen than to what is taken." The hunger in his face sharpened, then gentled into grief. He bowed his head over her hand. And when his mouth touched the inside of her wrist, Sabine did not feel devoured. She felt recognized. But as the first sacred line of blood passed between them, the bells of Vesper Keep began to ring in violent succession. The hunters had reached the gates. The blood exchange was not pain, as Sabine had feared. It was heat, then vertigo, then a rush of images too swift to separate. Winter forests, candle-lit treaties, Alastair standing alone on a battlefield while dawn approached like execution. Her mother's hands hiding letters beneath floorboards, Elira at the altar lifting her face not in surrender, but in witness. Through it all ran one unbearable certainty, that memory, once shared willingly, did not merely reveal truth. It gave it refuge. When the bells began, Alastair lifted his head at once. A scarlet mark no wider than a crescent remained at Sabine's wrist. He covered it with his thumb as if the sight of it struck him somewhere unguarded. "Stay here," he said. She drew her hand back. No, below them, shouts rose from the courtyard. Steel struck iron, somewhere a horse screamed. "You are anchored now," he said. "That does not make you invulnerable." "No," she answered, already reaching for the dark cloak hanging by the bed. "It makes me useful." He looked at her with the old instinct to deny, command, protect. Then perhaps he remembered what coercion had cost everyone already dead. "Stay beside me then," he said. "And if I tell you to run, I will consider it." A shadow of disbelief, nearly fond, touched his mouth. "You learn rebellion quickly." I had a poor teacher and many years to study. They went down together. The keep was awake in war. Servants carried water and lamps. Armed retainers secured the inner gates. Celestine knelt in the lower chapel beside her mother's body, refusing removal. Aunt Orion stood in the doorway with a knife in her shaking hand and a face no longer entirely ornamental. At the main hall entrance, snow blew through a splintered side door. A messenger, bloodied and breathless, bowed to Alastair. Lower pass breached, hunters with them, some from the valley, some not. And Morkant has entered the court chamber, so it would be both battles at once. Alastair turned to Sabine. The chamber! She knew why immediately. Hunters could kill bodies. Morkant meant to kill testimony. The court chamber lay beneath Blacklass Hall's mirror image in the keep. Circular, windowless, ringed by old carved seats where law had once been treated as sacrament. Tonight only 3 elders remained. 2 sat rigid and silent. Morkant stood at the central basin of black stone, one hand resting on the surface as though calming a beast. She smiled when Sabine entered with Alastair at her side. You saved me time. Alastair moved forward. Step away from the basin. Morkant ignored him. Do you know why this chamber survives every siege, child? Because law endures better than flesh. Men burn, records vanish, memory fades. But institutions learn how to keep their crimes alive under new names. Her eyes shone pale as frost. Your line has always been tedious in this regard. Sabine felt the fresh mark at her wrist pulse once under her sleeve. You erased the coercion clause, she said. You let women be traded and called it order. Morkant's expression did not change. I preserved peace. You preserved convenience. One of the silent elders stirred but said nothing. Morkant's gaze cut to Alastair. And you preserved your conscience by choosing guilt after obedience had already profited you. The words landed hard because they were not wholly false. Sabine stepped nearer the basin before he could answer. Then let us have the whole truth. Morkant's smile sharpened. Gladly. She drove her own wrist across a blade lying on the basin's edge. Black blood sheeted over stone. The chamber darkened. Sabine felt the blood memory answer, yanked forward by force of old witness and new bond alike. Images tore through her. Not only Elira this time. Others, women seated at treaty tables but denied speech. Daughters exchanged to settle debts. Witnesses confined until they bore sons or died. The remise line reduced deliberately, not from chance but policy. And beneath it all, one hidden addendum written by Morkant's own hand generations later. If a rememberer arises uncontested, and her testimony is voluntarily witnessed by the First Lord. No elder may void her standing without dissolving the Knight Covenant itself. Sabine gasped aloud. There it was, not merely proof of corruption, a weapon. Alastair saw it in her face before she spoke. Morkant saw it too. The elder moved with impossible speed. Sabine only knew danger had come when Alastair intercepted it. Morkant's blade went into him just beneath the ribs. He made no sound. Sabine's scream tore the chamber. The 2 silent elders finally rose. One shouted for guards. The other stared at the black blood on the basin, horror overtaking centuries of habit. Alastair ripped the blade free and struck Morkant back hard enough to send her against the stone ring of seats. Silver laced the weapon. The wound in his side smoked faintly. Sabine, he said, voice thin with effort now, speak. She understood. Truth only lived if uttered before power silenced it. Sabine turned to the elders. Her whole body trembled, but the mark at her wrist burned like a seal. There is a surviving clause, she said. If a rememberer is witnessed willingly by the First Lord, her testimony cannot be voided, except by dissolution of the covenant itself. Morkant concealed it because it would have ended the court's right to compel women of my blood. The older of the 2 elders blanched. Is this true? Morkant smiled through split lip and fury. Truth is rarely as useful as fear. Answer, Sabine said. Perhaps it was the bond lending force to her voice. Perhaps it was simply that someone had finally spoken without deference. But the command rang, and the elder who had been silent for 300 years bowed his head. It is true. The chamber erupted. Above them, the keep shook with impact as hunters battered the outer doors. Below, law itself had cracked. Morkant lunged once more, not for Sabine now but for the basin, as if she meant to destroy the records embedded in blood and stone. Sabine moved on instinct. She seized Alistair's fallen blade and slashed her own palm across the basin's rim. Her blood hit black stone, the room filled with witness. Every elder, every servant at the doorway, every guard arriving breathless from the hall saw what she saw Elira forced, heard the lost clause spoken. Saw Morkant's hand, striking it from the archives. No one could unsee it. When the vision broke, Morkant stood alone in a chamber full of those who finally remembered. Alistair swayed beside Sabine. And the elder nearest the door said, almost in prayer, "The covenant has chosen its witness." Truth did not stop the hunters. If anything, it made the night wilder. By the time the court chamber emptied into the upper halls, fire had already taken the western parapet. Smoke coiled through the stairwells. Somewhere below, the great gate had split. Sabine could not spare her attention for fear. Alistair's blood darkened his side with each step. "You need a physician," she said. "I need the hunters away from the lower crypts," he answered. "The records, and the servants, and you." He was pale now even by his own impossible standard. Yet the force of him had not lessened. It had only narrowed into something ruthless and final. In the central hall, chaos surged. Retainers fought with pikes and old muskets. Hunters in ash coats poured through smoke, silver flashing at belts and wrists. Orion stood on the great stair with Celestine behind her, and was shouting orders no one would have believed she knew how to give. Malin, armed with an iron poker, had become terrifying. When Orion saw Sabine, her face changed. "The lower passage is breached. They're heading for the chapel vaults." Sabine looked to Alistair. He had already turned toward the crypt corridor. "No," she said. He glanced back. "You cannot go alone. I can go faster alone. And die faster too." A bolt struck the pillar beside them, showering stone. Alistair seized Sabine by the arm and hauled her behind the stair's shelter. The touch was instinctive, furious with fear. "Listen to me," he said. "If Morkant reaches the old records, she can still turn confusion into survival. If the hunters set fire beneath the keep, half this mountain comes down. I am ending it." The words were too deliberate, too much like farewell. Sabine heard it and went cold. "Do not speak as if you have already chosen death." His gaze locked on hers. Smoke blurred the hall around them until it felt like they stood in some smaller, harsher world. "I chose badly once," he said. "I will not do so again." Before she could answer, Morkant herself appeared at the far arch, blood on her gown, beauty made dreadful by fury. Two hunters flanked her, one carrying oil, the other a satchel of powder. "The crypts," she ordered. "Bring the ceiling down." Alistair moved. He kissed Sabine's brow once, so swift she almost thought she had imagined it, and then he was gone into smoke and iron. "No," she breathed and ran after him. The lower corridors were half dark, lit only by wall torches and the intermittent glare of flames from above. Fighting echoed ahead. Sabine followed the sounds until she reached the archive vault where she had found her mother's letter. The door stood open. Inside, hunters were overturning shelves and splitting ledgers. Morkant stood at the center with a lamp in hand. Alistair had already reached her. Their collision was not elegant this time. It was old hatred finally given teeth. Stone cracked under the force of it. Sabine snatched up a fallen ledger before it could be trampled and threw it toward the rear alcove where damp might spare it. One hunter turned. She drove the metal edge of the record chest into his knee hard enough to drop him, then fled his grasp by instinct rather than skill. "Sabine!" Alistair's voice, sharp with warning. She looked up. Morkant had broken from him and seized the lamp. With one terrible motion, she hurled it into the stacked records. Flame ran greedily across dry parchment. "No," Sabine lunged for the nearest burning shelf. Alistair was there first, ripping free the blazing ledgers with bare hands and hurling them aside. The smell of scorched leather filled the vault. Hunters forced inward. Smoke thickened so fast Sabine coughed blind tears. Then the powder charge went off. The corridor beyond the vault thundered. Stones split. Dust and fire exploded through the doorway. Sabine was thrown backward into the cedar chest marked with the thorned rose. Pain burst through her shoulder. For a moment, there was only ringing. When vision returned, half the ceiling had collapsed. Hunters screamed beneath stone. Morkant had been pinned from the waist down by a fallen beam, her face white with disbelief and hatred. Alistair was on one knee amid rubble, blood pouring now in earnest from side and shoulder. The fire climbed. Sabine staggered to him. "Get up!" He looked at the broken arch behind them, then at the spreading flames, then at her. She knew that expression. Calculation. Cost. "The passage is blocked," he said. "There must be another way." "For you, yes," her heart lurched. "No." He caught her face between both hands, desperate now, no longer pretending distance. Ash had settled in his hair like premature snow. "Sabine, listen. The east ventilation shaft opens into the ravine. Malin knows it." "I can hold the beam long enough." "No, you must. I will not leave you to burn for my sake." His eyes closed once, wrecked by the sentence. When he opened them, the hunger she saw there was not for blood. It was for time, more time than the world was offering. "I have wanted," he said, breath roughening now, "so little for myself in so long that I had forgotten wanting could feel like prayer. Do not make my first answered prayer an exercise in watching you die." Tears stung her eyes from smoke and grief alike. The chamber groaned above them. Morkant laughed weakly from under the beam. "How devout!" Sabine turned, fury searing through fear. The blood memory, the voluntary bond, the living and buried records, they struck one another inside her like flint. This was not merely fire. This was witness waiting for a last act. She grabbed the cedar box, ripped out the remaining letters and the locket, and threw them into Alistair's arms. "Open the locket," she said. He frowned but obeyed. The thorned rose inside flashed in firelight. "My mother hid what mattered where blood could find it," Sabine whispered. "Not in paper, in us." Understanding hit him. Morkant saw it too late. Sabine pressed her bleeding palm to the locket and then to Alistair's wound. The exchange tore through both of them, memory, testimony, love, and a law older than Morkant's revisions. Witness passed fully, not from archive to record but from blood to blood. Sabine felt the truth root in him beyond destruction. Not her life, not her mortality, the witness. Morkant screamed, whether from pain or comprehension Sabine could not tell. The ceiling groaned again. Alistair gathered Sabine against him and rose with a sound less human than grief made physical. He shoved the fallen beam aside with strength born from desperation and centuries of denied violence. "Now," he said. The side passage opened, narrow and smoke-choked. Sabine stumbled into it. He thrust the cedar box after her. Then the remaining vault arch cracked. Stone came down between them. Sabine hit the ground hard, clawing at rubble, screaming his name as fire roared on the other side. And from within that wall of collapsing heat, she heard him only once more. "Live!" They dragged her out at sunrise through the east ravine shaft, half senseless from smoke and struggle. Malin did it herself, with Orion and Celestine behind her, all three soot-blackened and bleeding from small cuts. Above them, Vesper Keep still stood, but the western side was scorched and half the lower archive wing had collapsed into itself. Snow fell lightly through the ruin, hissing where it touched embers. Sabine fought them until her strength failed. "No," she kept saying. "No, he is inside, he is." Malin's grip tightened. "Child," the word, so nearly maternal, broke something loose. By midday, the fires were contained. By dusk, the dead were counted. Hunters lay in rows by the lower wall. Morkant's body had not been found intact. 2 elders arrived under white flags and did not dare claim authority before the servants. The valley houses sent letters so quickly their wax seals were still warm. Condolences, denials, offers, revisions. Power adapting as it always did. Sabine heard none of it fully. She sat in the old chapel library wrapped in blankets, the cedar box at her feet, Alistair's black coat around her shoulders, and felt the bond between them like a torn thread burning in her chest. Not broken, not gone, only distant. That was worse. Orion came to her on the second night. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, stripped at last of cosmetics, pride, and the illusion that elegance could save a person from history. "I was cruel to you," she said. Sabine looked at the fire. "Yes, I thought being chosen meant being valued." Sabine let the silence answer first. Then, "Often it only means being useful," Orion swallowed. "If he lives, I hope he returns to you." "If he does not," her face tightened, "then I hope every law in this valley rots." It was the closest thing to prayer Orion Harrow had ever offered. On the third night, the elders convened in the repaired court chamber. Sabine went because refusing would have turned witness into rumor, and she was done letting men rename reality after the fact. She wore black, not mourning silk from a cast-off wardrobe, but a plain dark gown Malin had chosen for movement and dignity. On her feet were the boots he had sent her the first night. The chamber fell silent when she entered. The surviving elders stood rather than sat. That alone would have changed history once. The oldest bowed his head. "Sabine Vale Remise," he said carefully, using the name House Harrow had buried. "The court acknowledges your standing as witness under the restored covenant." Acknowledges. As if truth required their permission. Still, she accepted the phrasing because law moved slowly even when shame drove it. "And Lord Vesper?" she asked. The elder's face shuddered. "We found no remains." The thread in her chest burned again. Not dead, it seemed to say, not where bodies end. She held the cedar box tighter. "Then hear this before you draft another revision in the dark. The covenant will no longer compel daughters of witness. No household may conceal or trade such blood for status. All prior clauses to that effect are void." A murmur passed through the chamber. One elder began, "That would alter—" "Yes," Sabine said, "that is the purpose." No one challenged her. That night snow fell thick over the mountain. Sabine could not sleep. The bond in her chest had become sharper, no longer distant but tugging, insistent, toward the western ruins beneath the keep. Alone except for a lamp and the black coat, she followed it down through broken corridors and ash-choked stone until she reached the sealed edge of the collapsed archive vault. The workers had left it for morning. Too unstable, they said. Sabine set the lamp down and knelt. The torn thread inside her pulled once hard. "There you are," she whispered, half prayer, half accusation. Carefully she squeezed through the narrow gap where beam and stone had shifted just enough to admit someone's slight. Dust filled her lungs. Burned parchment crackled under her hands. Beyond the collapse lay a cavity, shielded by an angle of fallen arch. And there, beneath stone held up by nothing but impossible will and a charred beam, sat Alastair Vesper. Not dead, not living easily either. His eyes opened at the sound of her breath. For one suspended instant neither moved. Then he said, hoarse with smoke and disbelief, "You disobey with astonishing consistency." Sabine dropped to her knees before him so quickly the lamp guttered. "You told me to live," she said, tears rising all at once. "You did not forbid me to come back." A wrecked laugh escaped him, brief and painful. His side was crusted black where the silver wound had half-healed badly. One leg lay trapped under fallen stone, yet he was conscious, more than conscious. Looking at her as if the sight itself required explanation. "How?" she whispered. He glanced toward the locket hanging now at her throat. "You put the witness in me." "Morkant destroyed the records she could reach, but not what we carried out. The bond had kept me." His expression altered, sobered by what he said next. "Barely." Sabine touched his face with shaking fingers. Ash marked his skin. Cool, beloved, real. "I thought you were gone. I tried very hard not to be." Her laugh broke into a sob she could not prevent. He lifted a hand, weakly at first, and she took it in both of hers, pressing it to her cheek. "There is a way," he said after a moment, studying her as if each word must be weighed for consequence. "The injuries will heal in time, but the bond between us, what we began by consent, will deepen if left unanswered. I can sever it if you wish. You would be free, mortal. Untouched by my future." Sabine understood the gift for what it was, not release from him, but release from obligation. a final refusal to let love become coercion. All her life, choices had been made around her, over her, despite her. Not this one. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. "I was untouched by my own future long before I met you," she whispered. "Do not offer me freedom as another name for absence." Her breath shook. "If there is a bond, let it be because I choose it." His eyes closed. When he opened them again, there was something in them she had only glimpsed before, wonder stripped of fear. "Sabine," he said, and her name in his mouth became a vow. This time when he kissed her, it was not tentative. Still gentle, still reverent, but deep with all the nights they had nearly lost, and all the centuries he had survived without expecting tenderness to survive him. She answered not with boldness but with certainty, her hand at his jaw, her tears cooling on both their skin. Above them, dawn began to seep through the cracks in the ruined stone. Weeks later, when the valley gathered under winter sun to hear the covenant rewritten, they did not stand as lord and captive, nor as savior and saved. They stood side by side. Sabine Vale Remise, witness restored. Alastair Vesper, first lord no longer kneeling to the law that had once broken him. The new covenant did not promise peace. Nothing honest ever did. It promised testimony, consent, and memory that could not again be bought into silence. Hunters still haunted the farther passes. The valley houses still calculated. Winter still came. But some endings are not mercy because they are gentle. Some are mercy because at last they are chosen. And in the years that followed, whether in the shadowed galleries of Vesper Keep, in the old road chapel rebuilt stone by stone, or beneath long red moons that returned each winter, they carried what could not be buried: grief, witness, hunger, and the strange hard grace of a love that had not begun in innocence, but had become. Against every law that failed them, a form of truth no darkness could keep.